Hi, I'm Tracey Cross. I am an independent director and a legal advisor. I'm also a board advisor and governance facilitator, so it's my pleasure to be here today with you, Mark. So Mark's asked me to come up with a topic, and the topic is 6 secrets to supercharge your board.
Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. My name is Mark Banicevich, and as you just heard, I have the pleasure again of spending time with Tracey Cross. Tracey, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
You were actually the very first episode that I recorded. I think I might have released it second. For some reason, it might have just been the order of subject or something, but ours was the first one, and if you remember, we had to do 4 takes for it.
It was a bit of a work on the tech.
It was, yeah, it was, yeah. Well,
and the animals didn't help, did they?
That's right. We had the first 2, we thought, no, we'll do one more, and then we recorded the third one, and I didn't have enough capacity on the phone, and it didn't work, so I had to delete stuff from my phone, and we did a 4th. So I've had more experience now.
This will be a test as to how you've improved.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much for letting me come back and do this again. I was really intrigued by this topic when you were talking about 6 secrets to supercharge your board, so I'm intrigued. First up, how did these come about?
So basically they came about through the work that I do with grounded governance. So that's with my board advisory and training, board training hat on. And we're all about making governance easy to understand, effective and fun. So, we think actually supporting the effectiveness of a board is really, really important. I mean, if we look at the PwC corporate director survey, where I think it was 30% of C-suite executives said or rated their board as good or excellent. I mean, it's quite low. Yeah. And then the IOD's conference last year, I think that they were sort of talking about 67% of respondents would like to move on a board member. So, they're not flash sort of results. So we sort of created these 6 secrets to success to supercharge your board in an attempt to have some fun and some lightness around the topic while really looking to enhance, board effectiveness.
Let's dig into them then. What's your first secret?
So the first secret is be one aligned team. Now that might seem pretty obvious, but it often, or more often than not, doesn't present. So evolving, changing, growing into one aligned team is really important for a productive board. And I think, what that looks like is, if you think of the infinity loop, sort of a number 8 on its side, and you have the board down one end, you have management down the other, and we've got the CE and the board chair in the middle, managing the information flows, managing the sort of the workloads and projects and all that sort of stuff between them. And that's sort of cemented by, mutual respect and really sort of living the values of the organisation. So where you've got that flow of information, from the management through the CE to the board to the, back to the chair and giving that direction, where that's really flowing, that's where you get, a successful and effective, board team.
Right.
And I think that's really what we aspire to.
Does it necessarily mean that the board agrees on everything?
Oh, no, not at all. But, it's that mutual respect and that flow of information, keep the discussions going. And I think that, we sort of like to think of it as a secret because, often in the traditional governance sort of text, it's about, board leading from the top, tone from the top. And we like to think of the important component being the board and management working together to set the tone.
So what does it look like when they're in flow?
Oh, things just working, like respectful conversations, great challenge, progress, things getting done, and supporting each other,
right.
Which is really, really important in this day and age when we're dealing with so much change on a continual basis.
So as you'd expect, inside the boardroom there'd be serious debates to come up with a good decision, and then when the decision's been made, outwardly everyone's working together.
Absolutely.
And flow.
Yep.
Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's great. So the first secret was being one aligned team. What's the second one?
Okay, the second one relates to the chair's approach and the chair's commitment. Obviously the chair is really influential as to whether a board is productive or not.
Right.
So I think generally, obviously, chairs, are doing their best. The majority of them do a good job. But I mean, in the governance facilitation training that I do, often I do see chairs that are really struggling. The chair's role is extensive. It's not about just managing meetings.
No.
and often they don't have support. So, you know, the chair's sort of forgotten about. You know, we sort of think about how, you know, board directors are getting on, but no one actually thinks to reach out to the chair and, you know, check in on him or her. So,
okay, right. And how about the third?
The third is around planning, and I think the important thing is that just a realisation and acceptance that it never stops. You know, sometimes governance can feel like a roller coaster, you know, just an ongoing, you know, more planning, more process, more paperwork, etc. And often, you know, what we see with people in governance is they want to get to the end of their to-do list. I mean, that's sort of me. Yes. I love ticking things off a to-do list. But the reality is that you never get to the end. And, you know, you really just need to accept that. And I think the key to a productive board being more effective is actually meeting less. So it might seem a bit sort of contrary, but, you know, often boards are meeting too often. Right. You know, if they're meeting sort of monthly, that tends to lead people down into the operational weeds. Yes. Doesn't give management any time to actually do the work. Right. So really sort of looking to sort of, you know, look at the cadence of meetings is really, really important. And I think, of course, around that, you really need, you know, clear work plans, clear agendas, clear expectations around what needs to come to the board, and clear expectations between management and the board for that to work. Okay,
the other thing that it makes me reflect on is a conversation I recently had with Tony Dench, where he says that strategy isn't something that happens on one day. It happens continually throughout the cycle. So,
just like the annual work plan. You know, everything that has to be achieved doesn't have to be achieved in one meeting. No. It needs to be spread across the year. Yeah. And, you know, the amount of boards, and look, I'm not talking all of this around top end of town, but, you know, smaller boards, not-for-profit boards, I mean, many of them don't have an annual work plan. No. So, you know, it's those tools which are critical.
Absolutely, and there is value in having an annual work plan for any company. Yeah. Those that don't have it, it's certainly something they should step up and get. So your first tip coming back to was be one aligned team. The second tip was around the chair's approach. The third one you've just shared is planning never ends. What's the fourth tip?
The fourth one is that boards ignore their own business. Now, you know, I would sort of consider that a secret because often it's not talked about because boards can very easily focus on management. You know, sort of monitoring and holding management to account, which some of them focus a little bit too much on, and actually forget about building their own effective, capable board team and culture. Okay, so I think that's really important to supercharge a board. And sort of that goes to proper board induction, to training, to, you know, the use of a board skills matrix, to formal evaluations, which again, you know, sort of many boards sort of don't do. So, you know, they've got to actually focus on their own business. And I think that, you know, boards supported with more time to be capable and productive will be capable and productive.
Yes, right. Okay, so this tip is around making sure that boards are getting their own hygiene right.
Yes.
As well as, you know, eyes in, trolley's out.
Absolutely. Because often, you know, we get around the board table and there is so much to get through.
Yes.
So, you know, hygiene or board reflection time just sort of goes out the window. But, you know, I'm very much, you know, I always like on agendas to have the last question being around the reflection. You know, have we provided management what it needs, you know, out of this meeting? Yeah. If not, why not? And also, are we looking forward to the next meeting? Because if a board member's not looking forward to the next meeting, there's a bit of a challenge there that needs to be unpicked.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so tip number 4, boards ignoring their own business is around ensuring that boards are doing their job well, focusing on their own processes and so forth. Fifth secret.
The fifth secret, this might surprise you, but directors are people too. You know, how often do we sort of talk about a board as sort of, you know, one entity, one heart, one mind, etc. Now, we need to sort of work together as a team, very, very important, but directors come to the table with their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own baggage, their own bias, etc. And they still have plenty to learn. Right. So, you know, I think that we need to actually acknowledge that, and time needs to be spent getting to know who's, you know, around the table with you. Because everyone's affected by their own lives, which can be a bit crazy at times, and that's being brought to the board table. So if time isn't spent actually getting to know people, you don't have to be bosom buddies, but just to get to know someone, how they operate, what's going on in their lives, then you can sort of be there to sort of support them on the other side.
As you suggest there as well, people have got their own things going on in the day-to-day that will affect their mindset on the day, it'll affect their ability to concentrate, and so just discussing those things about how things are going at home and being open about that sort of thing enables people to...
I think it's being curious about people, about your fellow board members without judgment. We don't need to be judgmental about things, but just seeing what's going on and when people might need time out. I think it's really important, but it's those sort of conversations that aren't often had.
Right. Yeah, okay. So secret number 5, directors are people too. I like that. That's great. You've got 1 secret to go.
Okay, drum roll. The last secret is that boards need work to do. An effective boardroom is one where everyone contributes. If you're getting to a board table and all that's happening is management telling you or reassuring you that everything's okay and everything's being complied with, it's just a bit of a waste of time. You've got a wealth of knowledge around the board table, and this has come up in one of the boards that I'm involved in where as a board, we've got a fabulous exec team, but we just want to get more, we want to contribute more.
Yes.
So, to be brought some challenges for a wider discussion rather than, here's the sort of solution, to actually call on the sort of the wealth of knowledge around the table is really important, and a lost opportunity if it's not being picked up.
Right. So a board that is just holding management to account and make sure that everything's ticking along is a board that's being wasted. You should get in there and say, we need help, we've got a big strategic issue to deal with here and would like to draw on your skill and expertise and get some debate going on to give us some idea about where to go.
And often, boards feel very comfortable holding management account. That's their sort of zone, particularly if you've got some lawyers on the board who haven't got the right sort of hat on. That's the sort of detail it's holding to account, and sort of that's where sort of board protocols sort of come in respect of, that's not just your role, and, there shouldn't be any surprises. You shouldn't be looking to sort of call anyone out or.
Yeah, based on conversations I've had with a few people now, one of the things I really like is boards that turn the agenda on its head. So you're talking about strategic stuff first, looking forward thinking first, and then once you've been through that, then you pick up the backward thinking stuff, the backward focused stuff, and doing the previous meetings of minutes at last.
Yes.
So
I've seen that happen, and also moving financials sometimes also not right at the start, because otherwise that just sort of swamps. That's all certain people want to sort of talk about. So yeah.
I'm not going to ask what sort of people. Okay, so in summary, 6 secrets. The first one, be one aligned team. The second one was about the chair's approach and remembering that the chair's a person too and may need some support at times, came out of that as well. The third one, planning never ends, so continue to be on your planning cycle. Tied in as well with the fourth, boards, don't ignore your own business, making sure that you're getting your own hygiene and processes and stuff done well. Fifth, directors are people too, and the sixth was giving the board work to do. Can you share an example of where these 6 secrets have really helped to lift the company's performance?
Oh, look, I think that, there's a variety. I mean, I think changing the cadence of meetings is really important, actually giving management time to do the doing.
So you think quarterly is a better cadence?
Well, the board that I'm on was sort of by, every second month.
Oh, yeah.
I mean...
5 or 6 meetings a year?
Yeah.
6. Okay, so given we're in New Zealand, so November... January, I guess, no meeting in December, is that squeeze that in?
But look, it all depends on the organisation as to what's going to work and what's sort of going on. And because remember, if you sort of move out board meetings, it doesn't mean to say that you can't have calls or if something comes up in between. So it's just having that flexibility, but it's allowing management to do the work. And then when you come to the board table, you're focused on what needs to be done, together with these other important aspects, that sort of more the hygiene, the board culture aspects, which I think are really important.
Cool. Other thoughts on how it...
I think that, as I said before, the board asking, to be involved in sort of the discussions, I think is really important. One board that I'm on, we have we have quarterly deep dives sort of into topics. So things that we might need to get across, or developments in the industry, or whatever's happening in the world, etc. But they're just sort of quarterly Whereas, it's that invitation to management that, hey, we can talk about things. And you do, but not necessarily from a sort of a starting point, all the work sort of being done really before it sort of comes to you and you're just testing and, sort of monitoring it, etc. So I think that that's a really good opportunity.
A bit more of an open table.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think people are always important in whatever you do, aren't they? So, having protocols around board time, I think it's really important, picking up that point about, directors are humans too, get to know them, know what's going on in their world. What is your board doing? Are we just all flying in on the morning of the board meeting and racing and then out?
Flying out,
What sort of culture does that sort of create as compared to, having dinner beforehand?
Yes.
Or it doesn't have to be all the time, but it just creates that, real sort of collaborative environment. And hey, look, we've got to have a bit of fun while we're, doing this job.
Yeah, great. Oh, actually, on that note, segue away from the 6 secrets, which have been fantastic. Final question: what's the best advice you've received?
Oh my goodness, so much advice, and I'm still learning. Learning lots.
Yeah, of course.
Still learning lots.
So share some advice.
Oh, look, I think the big thing for me is just to be curious. I think as, when I first went onto a board as a lawyer, it was always a challenge because, when you see legal things happening, you sort of want to just roll up your sleeves and offer sort of to do it. So it's sort of actually that's pulling back and managing it and being curious, not being afraid to sort of ask questions and just be vulnerable. I think that's sort of important.
Cool. Tracey, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
It's been really cool to catch up again. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. And you next episode.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.